on First at 9, this Wednesday the 16th of October 2024. Not for sale. Sri Lanka decides not to proceed with the sale of the national carrier. Growing income. Government revenue increases 40% year-on-year in the first 8 months on the back of increased tax income. Slowing down. Heavy rains leave over 160,000 people affected across the nation. Rainfall expected to subside in the coming days. Additional allowance. Government begins disbursing the monthly interim allowance for retired government servants.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
වැඩිම මනාපෙන් ජනතා තේරීම මෙවරත්.
සුදේශී ඔරිජිනල් කුහුඹම තමයි.
Hi, I'm Fiza. Are you after O-levels? If you are, join our ANC Foundation program.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
This is Derana First at 9, live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Sri Lanka's premier primetime English news bulletin, Derana First at 9. I'm Tarindu Mahendra, joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and from around the world. In your top story this evening, Sri Lanka has decided not to sell off government-owned shares in the national carrier. Chairman of Sri Lanka Airlines, Sarath Ganegoda, stated the new government has decided to restructure Sri Lankan Airlines under a viable business model. Speaking to a Singapore-based publisher, the new chairman of the airline asserted that following the restructure, the national carrier would be able to move forward towards a profitable future. In 2022, the then government decided to restructure loss-making state-owned enterprises, including the national carrier Sri Lankan Airlines, in a bid to make them more financially viable. The debt-ridden national airline had accumulated a total debt burden of around $1.2 billion as at the end of March 2023. In August 2022, the government announced that 49% of its shares in Sri Lankan Airlines and its management would be transferred to a competent investor chosen through a transparent procurement procedure. 6 parties responded to the request for proposal with initial expressions of interest, but none were pre-qualified for the next step of the process. Speaking to the Singapore-based travel and tourism publisher TTG Asia today, the newly appointed chairman of Sri Lankan Airlines, Sarath Ganegoda, stated the new government led by President Anura Dissanayake has abandoned the previous regime's decision to sell the national carrier. Ganegoda also revealed that steps will be taken to restructure the airline under a viable business model for a more profitable future. The airline's new chairman added that President Anura Dissanayake has instructed that the airline should be an institution that all Sri Lankans are proud of and should be owned by Sri Lankans. Chairman Ganegoda further emphasized that the flag carrier of the nation, Sri Lankan Airlines, is an important pillar of tourism, responsible for around half of all tourist arrivals into the country.
Horizon Campus 2024 Intake 2. Register now.
Welcome
to Cinnamon Life, South Asia's biggest entertainment hub, where awe awaits.
කාගෙත් ප්‍රියතම මෙලිබන් බිස්කට් දැන් 30ක් සීනි අඩුවෙන් රස දන්න කාටත්
Harisho.
Sadaharita Plantations Limited, celebrating 22 years of your trust.
The government's total revenue has increased to 2.56 trillion rupees during the first 8 months of this year, marking a 40% improvement. In its latest report, the Ministry of Finance showed that revenue growth was mainly derived from tax income, which amounted to 2.3 trillion, a 40% increase from a year earlier. Meanwhile, the primary account deficit decreased 38% to 900 billion. According to the Finance Ministry's pre-election budgetary position report, government revenue including grants totaled 2.56 trillion rupees in the first 8 months of 2024, increasing by 40.5% compared to 1.82 trillion rupees in the corresponding period last year. This increase was primarily driven by higher tax revenue. Tax revenue for the period rose by 41.4% year-on-year to 2.34 trillion rupees, up from 1.66 trillion rupees in 2023. Revenue from taxes on goods and services increased by 59.8% to 1.42 trillion rupees from 889.5 billion rupees. This increase was largely driven by a significant rise in revenue from value-added tax, which surged by 87.2% to 842.5 billion rupees, surpassing the total VAT collection for 2023, which amounted to 694.5 billion rupees. Revenue from excise duties increased by 42% to 385.7 billion rupees during the period. This growth was mainly due to higher revenues from petroleum, liquor, motor vehicles and other excisable items except tobacco, which saw a decline in revenue. Revenue from taxes on external trade, comprising customs import duty, cess levy, ports and airports development levy and special commodity levy rose by 29% to 302.5 billion rupees during the period. Meanwhile, non-tax revenue saw a significant increase of 31.7%, reaching 209.3 billion rupees. During the first 8 months of 2024, total government expenditure increased by 5.4% to 3.47 trillion rupees, up from 3.29 trillion rupees in the same period of 2023. Salary and wage expenses rose by 6.7% to 659.5 billion rupees, while interest expenditure grew by 2.2%, reaching 1.56 trillion rupees. Expenditure on subsidies and transfers increased by 1.5%, reaching 623.8 billion rupees, while capital spending and net lending rose by 22.4% to 435.3 billion rupees. However, other investments declined by 42.9%, primarily due to the impact of repayment on lending. The current account deficit narrowed to 483.8 billion rupees, or 1.5% of GDP in the first 8 months, down from 1.12 trillion rupees a year earlier. The overall deficit after grants was 911 billion rupees, a decrease of 38% from 1.47 trillion rupees. Domestic borrowings fell by 46% to 742.4 billion rupees as current spending was kept under control, while foreign borrowings increased by 80%, reaching 168 billion rupees. The primary balance stood at 648 billion rupees, improving from 55 billion rupees last year, with the interest bill at 1.56 trillion rupees, which was greater than the overall budget deficit. Defence Secretary, retired Air Vice Marshal Sampath Tuyakonta stated Sri Lanka must focus on harnessing the potential of its youth to address global challenges. The Defence Secretary made this remark while addressing the convocation of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University. Defence Secretary, retired Air Vice Marshal Sampath Tuyakonta was the chief guest of the convocation of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University held at the BMICH yesterday.
You are graduating at a time when our world faces complex challenges, global security threats, climate change, economic crisis, and the necessity to adapt to rapid technological advancements. As a country, Sri Lanka is no stranger to adversity. We have seen the impact of conflict and have also experienced the healing power of peace. Our nation, like many others, stands at the crossroad of immense challenges. So we must harness the potential of our youth, embrace technological advancements, and strengthen our economy, all while upholding the values of justice, equality, and freedom. We have a responsibility to protect our sovereignty, but we also have the opportunity to lead in education, technology, and sustainable development. The decision you make, the innovations you bring, and the leadership you display will shape our collective future.
Fast track your career from O-levels with eSoft.
කාගෙත් ප්‍රියතම මෙලිබන් බිස්කට් දැන් 30ක් සීනි අඩුවෙන්. රස දන්න කාටත්
හරිෂෝ.
දරුවන් ගැන ඒ තරම්ම හිතන නිසයි ලංකාවේ අම්මලා විශ්වාසයෙන් මෙලිබන් කිරිම දෙන්නේ.
After O-levels, start your Australian university degree in just 8 months with ACBT's Foundation Program. Enrollments close on 21st October. Call 071 115 1234 for Colombo or 077 011 3223 for Kandy.
The Department of Meteorology forecasts that the incessant rains that left over 160,000 people severely affected are expected to subside from tomorrow. However, several areas of the country continue to remain inundated, disrupting the daily lives of the public. Meanwhile, health officials raised concerns over the resurgence of infectious diseases due to the heavy flooding prompted by the adverse weather and advised people in flood-affected areas to take preventive measures. The heavy rainfall that persisted in the country throughout the past few days decreased today. The 52.5mm highest rainfall of the past 24 hours was recorded from Mannar. However, people's lives continue to be disrupted as several areas remain inundated. Residents of the low-lying areas along the River Ging are advised to remain vigilant as minor floods are reported from the Baddagama area due to the overflowing of the river. The latest reports of the Disaster Management Centre stated that 160,098 people belonging to 40,922 families across 13 districts are affected as a result of incessant rains and heavy flooding. Additionally, a total of 9,591 people belonging to 2,222 families are currently sheltering in 70 safety centres across the country. Against this backdrop, some schools in the western and southern province reopened today. However, schools affected by floods and those used as shelters for people displaced due to the adverse weather remained closed. Meanwhile, the Department of Meteorology forecasts the low-pressure area over the southeastern part of the Bay of Bengal will likely move northwestwards tomorrow. In view of the adverse weather, health officials raised concerns over the heightened risk of infectious diseases following the recent floods. The Public Health Inspectors Association stated that individuals exposed to floodwaters are particularly vulnerable to illnesses such as diarrhea, dysentery, leptospirosis and worm infestations.
Heavy flooding in several areas have created difficulties in procuring drinking water. Particularly, well water has been contaminated due to the floods. As a result, we request the public to drink boiled water. Further, it is also advisable to use bottled water for drinking purposes.
Meanwhile, Derana continued relief efforts to assist those affected by flooding by providing dry rations to flood-affected people in the Colombo and Gampaha districts. President Anura Dissanayake asserted Sri Lanka must align its education system with global demands. During a meeting at the Presidential Secretariat today, President Dissanayake called for urgent reforms to equip children with the knowledge and skills necessary to meet the demands of the future. He emphasized that every child deserves access to quality education and therefore the country must reorganize its schools to ensure these reforms are effective. Meanwhile, during the progress review meeting of the Agriculture Department, the President called for a long-term integrated national plan to organize the agriculture sector. He also highlighted the need to prioritize rural development projects with a focus on eradicating poverty and addressing social marginalization. Meanwhile, government began disbursing the monthly interim allowance for retired government servants today. Accordingly, pensioners' bank accounts were credited with an allowance of 3,000 rupees. President Anura Dissanayake said on X, pensioners with bank accounts will receive the interim allowance today, while those using post offices will have access to the funds after the 18th. The Treasury allocated 2 billion rupees to enable the payment to 679,960 pensioners this month. The Cuban ambassador to Sri Lanka, Andres Marcelo Gonzalez Garrido, stated Cuba is interested in supporting Sri Lanka's pharmaceutical production sector. The ambassador made this remark during a discussion with Prime Minister Dr. Harini Amarasuriya at the Prime Minister's office today. The discussions also centered on strengthening bilateral ties and offering scholarships in medical and sports education for training institutes and universities in Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Dr. Amarasuriya expressed gratitude for Cuba's continued support to Sri Lanka despite the economic challenges Cuba has faced in the recent years.
Sri Lanka Decides 2024.
The Gazette notification stipulating the maximum cost that can be incurred by a candidate contesting the 2024 parliamentary election is expected to be published today. Meanwhile, the Election Commission announced that the candidates contesting the general election can obtain their preferential numbers from the district secretariats of their respective electoral districts. 8,821 candidates have submitted nominations for the 2024 parliamentary election, which will be held on the 14th of November. This includes a total of 8,352 candidates representing 407 recognized political parties and 282 independent groups. 469 have submitted nominations as national list candidates. Meanwhile, the Election Commission has resubmitted the lists of candidates' preferential numbers to the district secretaries of the electoral districts following their evaluation. Accordingly, the Commission announced that candidates contesting the general election can obtain their preferential numbers from the district secretariats of their respective districts.
The maximum cost that can be incurred by a candidate contesting the 2024 parliamentary election will be determined as per the regulation of Election Expenditure Act. A discussion was held in this regard, during which the attendees put forward their opinions, views and proposals. Accordingly, the Election Commission expects to release the relevant Gazette notification in this regard today.
Meanwhile, a discussion was held between the members of the Election Commission and the district secretaries at the Election Secretariat this morning to discuss preparations for the general election. Later, another meeting was convened between the Election Commission, secretaries of ministries and heads of state corporations and statutory boards. Responding to a comment made by Cabinet spokesman Minister Vijitha Herath yesterday, former MP Uday Gammampila stated that he will not hand over the reports on the Easter Sunday attack, which he claims to possess, to the government. Speaking at a press briefing today, Gammampila claimed that the government is planning to arrest him before he releases the reports.
අපි විජිතේරත් ඇමතුමාට කියන්න ඕනි මේ බරපතල අපරාධයක් කරනවායි කියලා අපිව බියපත් කරලා.
We would like to inform Minister Vijitha Herath that he cannot stop me from publishing these reports by attempting to intimidate me. Former President Ranil Wickremesinghe received the Imam report on June 25th. He had the reports for 3 months without it being published. However, within 3 weeks of these reports reaching incumbent President Anurukumara Dissanayake, they have been released. This indicates that the incumbent president's staff may not be loyal to him. There were discussions yesterday about arresting me under the Official Secrets Act or the Counter-Terrorism Act before I could publish the reports. I will not release them at this moment. However, if the President fails to act by next Monday, I will definitely publish them.
අපි විසින් ප්‍රසිද්ධ කරනවාමයි.
Sri Lanka Decides 2024.
The Colombo Magistrates Court rejected an appeal for bail for director of WM Mendes Distilleries Arjun Aloysius and 2 others who were sentenced to 6 months in prison over tax evasion. Meanwhile, a group of foreign nationals were arrested yesterday in Chilau over their suspected involvement in online fraud. With that, here's a look at more local news across the island in brief. The Colombo Magistrates Court rejected an appeal for bail made by the director of WM Mendes Distilleries Arjun Aloysius and 2 others who were sentenced to prison on Monday over VAT evasion. The suspects were sentenced to 6 months in prison for defaulting the payment of 3.5 billion rupees in value-added tax by the company. The Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption arrested a Deputy Commissioner of the Eastern Provincial Department of Revenue for accepting a bribe of 200,000 rupees. The raid was carried out following a complaint made by a resident of Chenkaladi, Batikalo. Meanwhile, the Court of Appeal issued an interim injunction preventing the execution of an arrest warrant issued against Chairman of the Sri Lanka Cricket Selection Committee, Upul Taranga. On the 8th of this month, the Matale High Court issued an arrest warrant against the former cricketer over his failure to appear before the court pertaining to a match-fixing case during the 2024 Legends Cricket Tournament. The Court of Appeal issued an interim order against the Gamila Divisional Secretary preventing her from interfering with the activities of Sri Lanka's first cable car project in Ambuluwawa. This order was issued after considering a petition filed by a private company alleging that their project is being unduly hindered by the said official. In other local news, a 40-year-old Iranian national was arrested at the Bandaranaike International Airport this morning for attempting to enter Sri Lanka using a stolen Italian passport. During the investigation, officials uncovered that the Iranian national had planned to use Sri Lanka as a transit en route to Europe. The officers of the Criminal Investigation Bureau of Puttalam Division arrested a group of foreign nationals staying suspiciously in a hotel located in Iranavilla in Chilau last night. During the arrest, 20 computers, 3 routers and 282 mobile phones in possession of the arrestees were seized. Police suspects that the arrested foreign nationals are involved in an online fraud. Other Derana surpassed 3 million subscribers on the official YouTube channel. This makes Other Derana the first and the only Sri Lankan news channel to reach this milestone. Other Derana has succeeded in setting an unbreakable record in Sri Lanka's digital news space and is positioned as the Sri Lankan news channel with the highest number of subscribers on YouTube. Joining YouTube on October 7th of 2014, the Other Derana YouTube channel accumulated over 1.7 billion views in total, with over 131,500 videos uploaded so far. Other Derana is recognized as the #1 news brand among Sri Lankans. Surpassing 3 million subscribers on the official YouTube channel, Other Derana becomes the first and the only Sri Lankan news channel to reach the milestone. Welcome back. The Purchasing Managers Index for manufacturing for September 2024 declined to 54.1 from 55.5 in the previous month. However, the central bank in its Purchasing Managers report said all sub-indices except employment remained above the neutral threshold during the month. The increase in new orders and production was mainly attributable to the manufacture of food and beverages. The services PMI indicated a slow expansion in service activities in September, as reflected by the Business Activity Index, which recorded a value of 53.4. The continued expansion in business activities was driven by improvements in major sectors, including favorable interest rates, professional services, programming and broadcasting, real estate and transportation. New businesses increased in September with the upsurge observed in financial services. However, employment in services continued to decline. The Colombo Bourse closed in green today with the turnover crossing 1.7 billion rupees. The CSE All-Share Index closed 0.27% higher at 12,290.48 points, while the S&P SL20 also ended 0.17% higher at 3,613.53 points. The capital goods sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while the telecommunication services sector came in second. Foreign investors closed as net sellers, offloading stocks worth 385.9 million rupees, while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing shares worth 1.69 billion rupees. For more of the latest, join us on the other side of this short commercial break.